Do you think it would be good for technology companies or the social media platforms to be held liable for the damage being done by their products?
Well, I mean, I think it's an interesting question. I mean, I think there can come a time for anything. I definitely think that companies need to take responsibility for their own morale and everything else when it comes to what it is that they're publishing for the general public to realize their influence on people. And it really comes down to whatever their mission and their purpose is. Unfortunately, there's people and their companies out there that really don't care about anything but what goes in their pocket and in their buck. And I think at the end of the day, the viewer, the audience, the person has to take responsibility for their own wellness and mental health to make better decisions for themselves, regardless. So that could apply to any area of their life. They could go to a bar and drink alcohol, or they could choose not to. Again, it all comes down to a personal choice.
Is the discussion about social media and mental health only happening in Western developed countries, or are we seeing it in places that are more traditional around the globe?
Well, obviously, I live here in America, so I'm mostly exposed to America. I do work with patients globally, and I could tell you that this is a global issue because smartphones are global. Mostly everybody has a smartphone, but you do see in a lot of other cultures where there is more of a sense of community and where maybe they are organizing differently around circumstances and some unfortunate circumstances of the culture that they have a greater sense of inner peace, inner wholeness, community. And those particular aspects of the person and of the culture do kind of help the individuals of that culture to become more adaptable to negative circumstances because they're dealing with it from a more positive perspective. So a lot of it has to do with how you think about what's happening around you. So I do kind of feel that when people are more united as a community, that there's a lot of power in that, and I mean real face-to-face interactions. What you see here a lot, and I hear a lot about this from, especially from my patients, is there's a huge amount of isolation. And the more people are depressed or the more they're anxious, there's more of a tendency toward isolation. And we saw that with the pandemic. People kind of isolation became normalized during the pandemic. So when people got out of the pandemic, they almost didn't know how to socialize. But Western culture, just in general, we promote independence in the first place, whereas a lot of other cultures, they have a bit more of a community. There's still that getting together with family or helping each other out and seeing your neighbors and knowing your neighbors, and maybe they're grouping when it comes to prayer or even religion or spirituality or helping each other, right? So there is probably a lot more of that that I see in other cultures versus sort of this independent um, mentality that we see more of here, I would say, in America.
Whistleblowers have come out and said TikTok has specifically set algorithms in Western countries all to spread these dangerous trends like eating Tide Pods, choking challenges, Borgs, and spreading videos of depression and suicide. Where in China, the algorithm is set to spread videos on TikTok that are more educational. Knowing this is the #1 app kids are using all over the world, does this raise concerns?
It does because when you're talking about an online application that so many people have access to and that they're being influenced by, and it's literally something that they're watching before they go to bed at night and when they wake up in the morning at the times where their brain waves are most susceptible and most influenced, it does kind of raise concern if a lot of those messages may be negative and may normalize negativity. So of course that's going to be a concern. And again, it goes back to people having to wake up and take responsibility for themselves. Certainly, companies should have a moral fabric about them and be aware of what it is that they're putting out there to the public. But people have to take a personal responsibility for themselves at the end of the day, phones or no phones. They have to look deep within themselves and say, how am I feeling? Am I happy with where I am? And am I seeing myself from a strength-based perspective? And if the answer is no, and they feel that any platform may be affecting them, then they kind of need to detox from it and take a better look at themselves and make some changes.
Should governments impose limits, just like they do with alcohol, or is it too late to try and reverse something which already plays such a large role in society?
I mean, it's a really good question. I personally hate the idea of the government intervening in freedom and people's rights, but government intervenes all the time. I mean, you can't drive 90 down a 30-mile-an-hour zone, right? And government, they are setting certain standards and principles. Okay, hey, you have to pay your taxes on time, and you have to do this and that. And in some cases, rules are good. In some cases, rules do go too far. But when you consider the fact of, okay, should government intervene in how much alcohol is served at a bar, people who don't have a drinking problem will say, hey, no, I want to just be able to have as many as I can, and there's a limit. But when you consider that, oh, the alcoholic who goes into a bar and they don't stop and they have a problem, maybe there should be a limit, because then they're putting someone else in danger. So I really kind of flip flop both sides. And at the end of the day, I think people's safety is going to be the most important thing in both sides of the spectrum, because when you have someone who has a genuine problem, they really can't stop their problem. And a lot of times they can't even afford treatment, because treatment for them could be, $60,000 a month plus. So I think that the government maybe in certain cases should look at some areas to intervene, and not because they want to impinge on people's freedoms, but actually looking at freedom from the opposite side to say, how can we keep everybody safe?
So, Lisa, I have to ask you, how do you help people disconnect more from social media?
Well, for everybody, it's a little bit different, but there are some things that are the same, which is that you have to reconnect to yourself and build upon some of your coping skills and your core belief systems and really start building that up. But like anything, you have to actually reprogram your brain. And when you start to get used to being safe, just being alone, you can slowly build confidence by slowly exposing yourself to society, to situations, little by little by little. And unfortunately, we have to sometimes step outside of the box of comfort in order to achieve the goals that we want to achieve, and take some risks. And it's interesting. A lot of people, as much as they know that they may need to take risks in certain areas, they're afraid of failure, and they're afraid of, in some cases, they're also afraid of their own success. But we have to be able to take those risks and take small but significant steps toward where we want to go, and realize, hey, it's okay to feel a little bit uncomfortable. But as we get used to each situation, and as we expose ourselves a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, we realize that it's okay. And most of the time we realize, I can do this.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Lisa Palmer. Social media is not going away anytime soon. Therefore, problems which have emerged as a result are just going to have to be dealt with.